clinic's glass doors gleamed like a promise of safety, yet beyond their flawless surface lurked a hunger for control that pulsed in the sterile air, as if warning newcomers of the cold judgment waiting inside. A pale green reception desk under a glowing logo of a smiling family looked welcoming until you noticed the way nurses exchanged furtive glances as a small black boy in a wheelchair approached. A golden retriever pup perched at his side in a service harness, its soft brown eyes flicking between the child and the staff as though sensing the danger before it had a name. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, each revolution of his wheels echoing down the pristine corridor where every step felt measured against invisible rules. And as he reached the sliding doors, a tall physician emerged. White coat crisp, expression polite, but the moment his gaze landed on the boy and the dog, his lips thinned and the warmth drained from his tone. "I'm sorry. We don't treat animals here," he said smoothly, but the slight hesitation betrayed his contempt, as if the dog were not a lifeline, but a liability, and the boy felt the world tilt beneath him, a quiet storm gathering in the hushed hall, while behind the doctor, a row of framed diplomas boasted academic achievement, yet hid a darker truth. This was a place where prejudice drank deeply of authority, and cruelty lay in wait behind every well-rehearsed protocol, ready to drench innocence with humiliation. The bell above the clinic door chimed softly as the boy rolled forward, his chestnut eyes trembling behind calm resolve, while the golden retriever at his side pressed its muzzle into his palm for reassurance. But the receptionist's smile froze, halfway, her gaze flicking from the boy's dark skin to the service harness on the dog as if both were blemishes on the bright promise of care. She tapped a manicured nail against the countertop, the sound harsh in the hushed lobby, before jerking, her head toward the back and hissing, "He's here," as though the boy were a rumor that needed confirmation. The doctor emerged from behind a frosted glass door, tall, impeccably dressed, bearing an embroidered name and title that glinted under the fluorescent lights. But the moment his gaze settled on them, his professional mask cracked. Nostrils flared, knuckles whitened on the clipboard he gripped, and he cleared his throat with deliberate slowness. "I'm afraid we cannot see you today," he announced, voice devoid of courtesy, each word a cold blade. "This facility does not accommodate animals." The boy's brow furrowed as he opened his mouth to explain that the dog was not a pet, but a trained support animal, vital to his health. That without its warnings of approaching seizures, he was at constant risk. Yet the doctor cut him off with a dismissive wave, lips curling into a veneer of pity that reeked of condescension. "You'll have to make other arrangements," he said, tone sugary but laced with disdain. A nurse hovered nearby, arms crossed, eyes darting from the dog to the boy's wheelchair, the silence between them pregnant with unspoken fears and centuries of prejudice. The dog whined softly, stepping forward as if to shield its young companion, and the doctor's patience snapped. He yanked at the harness and flung the canine toward the far corner of the lobby, the mesh rubbing raw against pressed scrubs before it, skidded to a halt against the wall. The dog yelped, scrambling to its paws, fur ragged, disoriented, its pleading gaze finding the boy's broken one across the expanse of linoleum. The boy's throat tightened around an invisible scream as he fought the urge to lunge forward, wheels spinning fruitlessly on the polished floor. Staff and patients averted their eyes. They watched as if witnessing a spectacle rather than an atrocity, their silence amplifying the sting of betrayal. The doctor straightened his tie, tapped his clipboard against his thigh, and forced a thin smile. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience," he said, voice crisp and clipped as he ushered the boy toward the exit. "You're free to seek care elsewhere." The boy felt his skin crawl with humiliation, the color of his blood betraying shame, while the dog limped over, head low, and pressed itself against his leg in solidarity. As they exited, the glass doors slid shut behind them with a painful finality, sealing the clinic's cruelty and leaving behind the faint echo of a young life pummeled by prejudice, an echo that would soon reverberate far beyond these walls. He pushed through the clinic's glass doors into the crisp morning air, the gold leash slipping from his fingers as if it burned him, and the retriever stumbled against the sidewalk, fur matted and eyes wide with confusion. drawing a cluster of stares, from parents dropping off younger siblings, some clutching designer coffee cups as though their warmth could shield them from the ugliness they'd just witnessed. "What kind of brat brings a dog to a doctor's office?" one mother hissed under her breath, while another adjusted her child's coat and muttered, "He should have known better than to show up here." The boy knelt beside his companion, brushing trembling fingers through its fur and whispering apologies that tasted like ash on his tongue, and though his heart ached, he refused to collapse. Pride and fear tangled inside him like barbed wire. Someone called out, "Hey, you can't park that wheelchair here," as he angled toward the curb, and an elderly man in a trench coat flicked the brim of his hat, sneering, "This isn't a petting zoo, kid." The retriever gave a low whine and pressed close, to his side, as if seeking shelter in a world that offered none. He rolled forward, the asphalt rumbling under the wheelchair's wheels, and reached his backpack for his phone, fingers hovering over his mother's number before a wave of shame crashed over him, reminding him that every plea for help would carry the weight of his inconvenience and the smell of medical-grade disdain. The dog limped, head down, and a group of teenagers crossing the street snickered, one calling, "Get that mutt some teeth," while another mimed a seizure in crude mockery, an echo of the ignorance that had dismissed the canine's training as worthless. He bit his lip to keep from shouting at them, knowing any outburst would confirm the stereotype they'd already carved into his skin. Angry black boy, undeserving of empathy or care. The sun rose higher, turning the clinic's mirrored facade into a beacon of exclusion that glinted with every lie he'd ever been told about his place in this world. He wheeled down the block, weaving between parked cars, each scratch and dent a silent testament to someone else's recklessness, but now his barrier to escape. His phone vibrated in his pocket, one of the few kind classmates checking in, her text reading, "I'm so sorry. What can I do?" He stilled, fingers hovering over the screen, torn between pride and desperation. Before he could reply, a sharp bark cut through the air as a small white poodle yipped at his heels, its owner shouting, "Control your dog, freak!" A voice replied, too close for comfort. "That's what you get for bringing your own terror show to the sidewalk." The boy didn't look back. Instead, he guided his friend, his silent sentinel, toward the bus stop, each revolution of the wheels carrying them farther from the clinic, but not from the stain it had left on his spirit. At the stop, he perched the leash on his lap and held the dog between his knees, scanning the street for the bus that would not care about service animals or color or how tightly fear clutched his chest. People lined up behind him, avoiding eye contact as though his presence might infect them with guilt. A woman tapped his shoulder and jerked her chin toward the dog. "You know that thing's not allowed on public transport, right?" Her voice was low, contempt dripping from every syllable, but enough for the waiting drivers to hear. The dog trembled, and the boy swallowed the rising rush of anger that threatened to tighten his voice into a scream. He pressed the help button on his wheelchair armrest, a gesture meant to signal a medical emergency, hoping the blue and white bus would pause for him, not because he was black or because his dog was a service animal, but because the law demanded it. When finally the bus hissed to a stop, the driver leaned out the window and squinted at the dog before spotting the paraphernalia on the boy's harness. "Service animal?" he questioned, and the boy nodded, voice barely a whisper. "Medical alert dog." The driver nodded curtly and lowered the ramp. A few passengers shuffled to create space, some glaring, one tutting. "What's next?" "Emotional support." "Children?" The boy edged aboard, carrying his friend through glares and murmurs until they reached a seat by the window. He buckled the dog's harness strap to the armrest bar and settled in, the engine rumbling to life like a promise of onward motion. Outside, the clinic receded into the distance, its reflective windows swallowing the sun's glare as though it meant to hide the cruel deeds done behind its polished walls. The dog leaned its head on his lap, eyes blinking sleepily, and he stroked its ears, finding comfort in its steady breathing. The bus jolted over a pothole, and for a moment he closed his eyes, imagining a world where color and disability didn't determine the kindness he could claim. He opened them to the passing storefronts, their signs offering assistance, all welcome, care for everyone. But the street itself bore the scars of broken promises, graffiti declaring segregate or integrate, walls pockmarked by bullets of neglect. He gripped the harness tighter, resolve hardening in his chest like tempered steel. When the bus reached his stop, he wheeled off into the cool shade of an elm-lined avenue, the dog trotting at his side once unbuckled, tail wagging in cautious hope. The clinic lay behind them, a fortress of prejudice, but before him stretched the uncertain path home, where his mother would be waiting with open arms and the strength to confront the world's cruelty on his behalf. And as they rolled toward that promise, the boy realized that humiliation might stain his memory forever, but it could never break the bond he shared with his dog, nor extinguish the fierce light of justice that burned inside him. Let's take a brief pause. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and whether you've ever faced something like this in your own life. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We continue now. The reckoning in sterile halls. He returned home that night, shattered and silent. The golden retriever curled against his chest in a fragile knot of trust and fear. But before dawn's first grey, he lay awake in a bed that felt too big, replaying every sneer of pity, every furtive gasp of relief from onlookers who wished his pain to be someone else's story. The dog's soft whines tugged him back to waking terror, and he knew he could not face another sunrise without someone strong at his side. The next morning, as mist clung to lawns and cars still glistened with dew, his mother, an attorney known for fighting discrimination in hospital corridors and boardrooms, stepped through the clinic's glass doors like a storm incarnate, her tailored navy suit cutting a line of authority through the antiseptic lobby, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of every wrong her son had endured. Nurses froze mid-smile, receptionists' pens hovered above clipboards as they recognized her name whispered among staff. "That's Dr. Harrington's daughter." The doctor himself appeared, crisp coat buttoned, clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield, but his composure flickered when he saw her steel blue eyes narrow on the stretcher marks in the boy's jacket and the leash of the trembling dog. "Good morning," she said, voice smooth as marble yet suffused with warning. "I'm here for my son's appointment." His voice, brittle with practiced politeness, offered protocol. "Ms. Harrington, I'm afraid we—" She cut him off, stepping closer until the soundproof glass walls seemed to tremble under her presence. "You refused to treat him yesterday. You yanked his service dog like a rag doll. You humiliated a child in the name of policy. I want answers, and I want my son seen today." A hush fell. Staff exchanged glances that carried the same question. Who did she think she was? A mother, a lawyer, a black woman challenging authority? The clipboards wavered in trembling hands. The doctor swallowed, his polite smile wobbling. "Our policy does not allow animals—" "My son's dog is a lifeline," she interrupted, voice crystallizing with rage that had been forged in courts where she had dismantled lesser men's prejudices piece by piece. "It alerts him to seizures. Without it, his life is at risk. You are negligent at best and malicious at worst." The receptionist, summoned by the tense tableau, leaned forward and whispered to her colleague, "She's overreacting. It's just a clinic." The colleague's twitching lips betrayed unease. Dr. Harrington, her father, might have been proud, but this daughter bent on justice needed no ally's approval. The doctor's perfect mask cracked, revealing a flash of contempt that he quickly disguised. "If you insist, I can schedule another consult with an administrator." "No," she said, voice low as steel rails. "You will see him now, in this room, with his dog by his side, or I will file an emergency injunction and strip this clinic of its license." The threat landed like a cannon blast. His professional outrage warred with fear. Malpractice suits, bad press, loss of accreditation. His jaw clenched, but his badge of pride forced him to concede. "Very well," he muttered, motioning toward an exam room that filled with back-of-the-eye stares and whispered curses. As he led them down the hall, the child's heart pounded in his throat. The dog's tail wagged hesitantly, sensing both rescue and ruin. At the door, the doctor paused to collect himself, but his words dripped with condescension as he opened it. "Try not to make a scene." Inside, the exam table gleamed like an altar of trials, its paper covering fresh. The mother set the dog's harness gently on the boy's lap, and he felt its steady tug of comfort. The doctor fumbled with his stethoscope, eyes flicking between child and canine as though expecting them to explode. He ran through perfunctory exams, pulse, reflexes, breath, each touch guided by protocol rather than empathy. When he pressed the stethoscope to the dog's ribs, an absurd gesture meant to assert authority, the animal leapt back with a frightened yelp, ears flattened in terror. "That's enough!" the mother snapped, stepping between them so sharply her heels clicked like a judge's gavel. "You have no right to mishandle him or the dog. If you cannot treat him with basic decency, notify me now so I can find someone who will." The doctor's face flushed, and he stepped back, hands raised in hollow surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. In that room of painted walls and medical charts, the unspoken verdict hung heavy. He had failed the most fundamental duty of his profession. The mother gathered her son in her arms, and he clung to his dog, tears spilling free at the edge of relief. As they turned to leave, cameras from local reporters peered through the corridor window, their lenses trained like vultures on what would become tomorrow's headline. The restoration of dignity came at a steep price. The boy's humiliation broadcast beyond these walls, every echo of his suffering captured in pixels and sound bites. But as mother and child passed through the glass doors into the bright morning light, the stares and whispers faded behind them, replaced by the roar of justice finally unleashed. And in that thunderous moment, the clinic's spotless facade felt both tarnished and vulnerable, exposed to a reckoning that would not rest until prejudice was excised from its sterile halls. The media maelstrom and the clinic's last stand. The moment the clinic's front doors swung shut behind them, the flashbulbs erupted in a frenzy. Dozens of reporters and camera crews jostling for position on the sidewalk, as though the world itself had come unhinged. The boy's mother shielded him with her body, one arm wrapped around his shoulders. The golden retriever pressed against her leg, its fur still damp from the doctor's rough handling, its eyes wide with fear and blinking against the glare of spotlights. A microphone thrust forward cut the air. "Ms. Harrington, can you tell us why your son was refused treatment?" A reporter from the local TV station shouted, "Do you think this clinic's policy is racist?" Another screeched, "Why would you bring a dog into a doctor's office?" As if ignorance could obscure the truth, the boy's cheeks burned with humiliation, not only for the dog's tossed body, but for the spectacle of his mother's calm fury splashed across every screen in town. Voices from the crowd rose in a chaotic chorus. Some parents nodded in righteous support, while others hissed behind designer sunglasses, "Play the race card much?" and "He's just a spoiled brat demanding special treatment." Every slur, every thinly veiled insult tumbled over the next, crowding the air with prejudice that stung sharper than broken glass. The mother raised her voice, cutting through the chaos. "My son's life depends on that dog. He has every right to receive medical care without humiliation." Cameras swung to capture the dog's trembling body as it tucked its head between its paws. A cameraman leaned in too close, muttering under his breath, "This is all for views," while a production assistant whispered, "They're milking it for headlines." The boy felt each step like a betrayal of his dignity. Suddenly the clinic's administrator appeared, flanked by two burly security guards, attempting to stem the tide. He stepped forward, badge glinting, and barked, "Settle down, please." But his words dissolved in a sea of demands. "We demand answers," a voice called. "Why was a black child denied care?" another demanded. The administrator's attempt at a polite smile cracked when someone shouted, "Monkeys get better treatment at the zoo!" The sickness of those words curled in the boy's gut, and he pressed his face into his mother's side, wrists turning white on the wheelchair arms. Inside the lobby, staff pressed against the glass walls, wide-eyed, shocked by the storm they'd unleashed. A nurse's face crumpled in guilt as she turned away. Another covered her mouth, tears brimming as she remembered her own silence when the boy and dog had first been assaulted. The administrator tried diplomacy. "We're conducting an internal review," he intoned, voice trembling under the relentless buzz of microphones. The doctor acted in accordance with policy. "Policy?" The mother cut in, stepping forward so her voice trembled through the crowd. "Policy cannot supersede humanity." Her words ignited a fresh wave of chanting. "Humanity first. Kids before rules." Reporters scribbled furiously in legal pads, while cable news choppers whirred overhead, their blades chopping the sky into frantic staccato. As the dog whimpered and the boy swallowed hard, the mother lifted her son's hand and kissed his forehead, her eyes flicking to every camera lens as if daring the world to look away. Then, in a sudden pivot, she walked back inside, flanked by her son and the dog, and faced the receptionist who had once feigned indifference. "I want a full apology on record," she stated, voice low and unwavering. "And I want to see every member of your staff acknowledge their complicity." The receptionist's smile fled as she stammered, I'm sorry," before catching herself, hating the tremble in her own voice. Security guards ushered them past the frosted glass doors into the hushed corridor, where patients peered from exam rooms, their faces a mixture of pity and relief that they were not the target today. A doctor in scrubs peered from around a corner, eyes flicking with fear, and hurried back to his station. The mother paused at the door to exam room 4 and delivered her final blow. "We will be back tomorrow with our legal counsel, and if I do not receive a public retraction and policy change by then, I will see you in court." With a click of her heels, she guided her son and his dog through the lobby, cameras following in dutiful procession, capturing every moment of their departure as though it were a royal procession. Outside, the crowd parted, leaving a single woman clutching a "Justice for Jonathan" sign sobbing quietly in the gutter, while others lingered, shouting curses at the clinic's facade. As the trio disappeared down the street, the clinic's glass doors reflected back a shattered illusion of neutrality and care. Inside, the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in guilt, and a single framed mission statement on the wall, "We care for all patients equally," stared blankly at an empty hallway, a testament to promises broken and a war only just beginning. At dawn, the clinic's pristine windows were fogged with breath and protest signs. Reporters' cameras pointed like rifles through every pane, as if ready to fire revealing questions into any flicker of movement inside. A barricade of orange cones and yellow tape marked the perimeter, beyond which mothers clutching strollers and elderly neighbours in cardigans murmured solidarity, while a handful of men in dark suits clustered near the entrance, their polished shoes tapping impatience against the concrete. When the boy and his mother arrived with their retriever, now wearing a clean new vest proclaiming its status in bold letters, cameras exploded into action, flashes strobing against the clinic's facade. A drone whirred overhead, its lens trained on the door as it snapped open to reveal the clinic's director, a silver-haired man with a forced smile so brittle it cracked under the glare of scrutiny. "Ms. Harrington," he began, voice trembling like a leaf in a storm, "we understand your concerns." His words were drowned by a reporter's shout, "Will you admit racism drove your policy?" Another hurled, "Why humiliate a child and his service animal?" The director's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes darting to the riot of microphones before him. A journalist in a sharp blazer pressed forward. "Do you still believe an African-American boy is less deserving of care?" That single question burst the dam of his composure. He inhaled, exhaled, and offered a statement so rehearsed it rang hollow. "We regret any misunderstanding and are reviewing our protocols." His apology dissolved as a mother in the crowd called out, "Words without change are just more cruelty." The director's assistant scribbled frantic notes on clipboards, but the reporters pounced on every hesitation, every slip in his polished veneer. Behind them, the boy's dog sat unflinching, its golden eyes steady and unafraid, a beacon of dignity in a sea of shame. Passers-by joined the gathering, some holding placards reading "Health, not hate" and "Racism has no clinic," while a solitary teenager, cheeks streaked with tears, approached the boy to murmur, "I'm so sorry. They used to be my doctor." The boy's mother placed a firm hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Stand tall," and he straightened, shoulders back, eyes bright with defiance. Inside the lobby, voices of frightened staff drifted through the glass, a nurse begging to speak off the record, a receptionist cursing under her breath, the janitor shaking his head at the spectacle. The director retreated into the clinic, the doors sliding shut with a hiss that silenced the crowd for a heartbeat before the roar of cameras resumed. In the hush that followed, the mother lifted her son's hand, lifted her voice, and declared, "We will not be intimidated. We will return each day until every patient, regardless of skin or need, receives respect." The dog let out a single clear bark as if to punctuate her vow, and the protesters echoed her with a cry of approval that rattled the windows. Behind the yellow tape, the clinic's mission statement, once a carefully staged salesman's promise, now hung tattered on the lobby wall, its words, compassion and equal care, bleeding ironies in bold print. As the crowd swelled and the media caravan showed no sign of departure, the boy realized the fight had grown far beyond his own hurt. It had become a reckoning for an entire community, a challenge to dismantle every hidden bias lurking behind polished doors. And in the charged electricity of that morning, with cameras blazing and hearts ignited, he knew the siege of silence was over, and the voice of truth would echo far longer than any clinic's final blink of its lights. He never imagined that the halls of power would feel colder than the clinic's lobby at protest dawn, but as he and his mother wheeled into the sterile boardroom, the air crackled with indignation and fear that outmatched any roar of reporters. Outside, behind the long, polished table sat the clinic's trustees, stern-faced men in dark suits and women in expensive scarves, each a guardian of the institution's reputation, and each now braced for the story that threatened to shred their polished facade. The boy's dog sat on the floor, ears pricked, its presence a simmering rebuke to the veneer of civility around them. The chairman rose, a silver-haired man whose quiet gaze dared them to speak, and said simply, "We understand you have grievances." His polite tone was a velvet glove covering steel. His mother drew in a breath, the room's hush swallowing the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and began her account with crystalline clarity. The doctor's contemptuous refusal, the dog flung like refuse, the boy's fear and humiliation, the receptionist who pretended not to see, every moment laid bare with the precision of courtroom testimony. Each trustee's features flickered, discomfort, annoyance, anger, yet they said nothing, waiting for her to falter. She did not. When she spoke of hidden prejudice, how policy had become an instrument of racism and ableism, her words struck like lightning, illuminating the dark corners where they had hoped to hide. A trustee coughed. "Our clinic serves thousands each year. We cannot allow one incident to eclipse our entire record," he protested, voice heavy with entitlement. A woman next to him added, "We have policies to ensure safety. If we bend them for every special case, soon we'll have no consistency." Their complaints dripped with the unspoken truth. They valued order more than lives, protocol more than compassion. The boy's eyes burned as he heard them dismiss his pain as an anomaly when it was a symptom of their systemic cruelty. He shifted in his wheelchair, the dog leaning against his leg in silent solidarity, and cleared his throat. For the first time in weeks, he spoke. His voice trembled but did not break as he asked, "Is my life less valuable because of my skin? Is my safety a burden because of my disability? Should I have washed away my dog's service vest in blood before you'd see me as human?" The room shuttered. The trustees' murmurs died. The chairman's hands tightened on the table. "Your son's service animal is recognized under federal law," the mother continued, rising to her full height. "You disregarded both compassion and compliance to policy. You humiliated a child because you believed no one would hold you accountable." She paused, gaze sweeping the room like a verdict passed. "I demand full policy revision, mandatory training in anti-racism and disability awareness for every staff member, and a public apology published in all local outlets." Silence followed, so profound it pressed in on their eardrums. A junior trustee cleared his throat and offered a tepid agreement. "We will review the matter and consider your requests." But the mother's eyes bored into him. "Consider?" she repeated. "My son's trust was broken, his dignity stripped, and for that you will act swiftly. Consider is not enough." As she spoke, the boy counted the trustees' shifting postures. The line between saving face and saving lives had never been thinner. The chairman raised a trembling hand. "Very well, we will implement your demands, effective immediately." His voice quavered, astonishing them all with its concession. With the meeting adjourned, the trio departed down the corridor, where staff peeked from behind doors, relief and shame in their eyes, and cameras in the lobby blinked furiously as word of the boardroom's capitulation spread. Outside, protesters cheered, the boy's mother raising his hand aloft as though he were a champion returning from battle. The golden retriever barked once, a clear, triumphant note that echoed against the glass, and in that moment, the fortress of prejudice cracked wide open, revealing that even the most rigid bastions of authority could be undone by the unwavering courage of a child, his dog, and a mother unwilling to let injustice stand. The trustees' promises echoed through empty hallways like a cracked bell, but within hours the fragile veneer of compliance began to crumble as whispers of resentment crept back into the clinic's corners. Nurses who had offered tentative apologies now muttered under their breath about that boy's mother. Custodians crossed themselves as they passed his empty wheelchair by the reception desk, and the director's clipped statement to the press that they had taken decisive action to uphold dignity and patient rights rang hollow in the ears of anyone who knew the truth. Behind closed doors, the doctor who had first flung the golden retriever across the lobby paced in his office, fingers drumming against the polished oak like a man counting down to revenge, while a group of staffers huddled by the coffee machine, sharing tales of crazy lawsuits and entitled families, as though fear could be transmuted into scorn. The boy arrived for his scheduled follow-up with a mixture of hope and dread, the retriever once again at his side, vest clean and service tags gleaming. But the second they crossed the threshold, the receptionist's forced grin snapped into a brittle mask, and she gestured at the back with a single nod that seethed with barely concealed contempt. They were shown into the same exam room where the confrontation had first shattered the clinic's illusion of neutrality, and as the boy settled onto the cold table, the doctor stepped forward, stethoscope swinging like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. His eyes flicked to the dog, beneath the glass-panelled diploma that no longer felt like an achievement but a warrant for cruelty. Instead of a greeting, the doctor offered a curt, "Walk us through your symptoms," as though the boy were a nuisance to be diagnosed, rather than a child who had endured a public spectacle of hatred. The retriever whined softly, tail tucked, and the boy winced as the doctor's hand brushed the dog's side in a forced audition, as though testing its legitimacy rather than its health. When the boy described the mild rash on his arm, nothing serious, a minor irritation, the doctor scribbled in his notes with a flourish, then paused, head tilted. "Has your dog ever bitten anyone? Chewed medical equipment? Caused a scene outside our facility?" His tone was not curious but accusatory, each question a needle shoved into the boy's pride. The retriever let out a low growl, not at the boy, but at the doctor's cold gaze, and a silence so thick it tasted like iron filled the room. The doctor tapped his pen, brows furrowing. "We have reports, anonymous but multiple, of disturbances attributed to your dog," he continued, voice smooth but lethal. "We're considering revoking its clearance until further notice." The boy's heart clenched. It was not enough that they'd refused him care, flung his friend like trash, rallied the community against him. They now sought to strip him of his only protector, to render him truly helpless. The dog's ears flattened, eyes wide, and it leaned against the boy's leg in a silent plea. The boy swallowed, hands trembling on the table's edge, and looked to his mother, who had been watching from the doorway. She stepped forward, heels clicking with the calm authority of a judge entering her chamber. "On what grounds?" she demanded, voice icy. "You have no evidence beyond prejudice. These reports are nothing more than gossip fueled by racism and fear." The doctor's cheeks flushed, raw nerves showed beneath his professional facade. "We must consider the safety of all patients," he stammered, eyes flicking to the window where cameras lingered. "If any disturbance puts liability on this clinic—" "Liability!" she spat, voice rising. "Your liability is your cruelty. Your liability is the humiliation you inflicted on an innocent child. You have admitted your prejudice in black and white. You sought to weaponize policy against a boy whose only crime was needing a service animal." A long beat followed in which the dog's panting seemed thunderous, in which the doctor's scribbles on his notepad fell silent, in which every unspoken fear and every silent ally held its breath. Then, from the corner of the ceiling, Speakers came a soft notification. A live newsfeed had just begun broadcasting. The boy's mother turned, eyes narrowing. "You notified the press?" The doctor swallowed, guilt and panic dancing across his features. It was the legal department's decision. They felt transparency was best. Transparency. Her laugh was cold. "Transparency for your reputation, not for my son's rights." She signaled to the boy, and he took a cautious step off the table, the dog at his side. "We will see you in court if you revoke his clearance," she declared. "And we will bring every shred of evidence of your racism and inhumanity along with us." At that moment, the camera's red light blinked through the glass, capturing the tableau. A wounded boy, a trembling retriever, a mother roaring truth at a man in a lab coat. The doctor's gaze flickered to the lens, and he realized the next chapter of this story would not be written behind closed doors. As they turned to leave, the retriever at his side, the boy felt a spark of defiance flare in his chest. No rule, no prejudice, no humiliation would ever steal his voice or his friend again. And as the door slid shut behind them, the sterile hall echoed with the promise of a reckoning far fiercer than any press conference. A reckoning that would burn the clinic's lies to ash and demand justice in the harsh light of day. The court of public opinion. The following morning, before the sun crested the city skyline, a phalanx of news vans and camera crews had already staked their claim on the clinic's glass facade, their satellite dishes like antennae searching for the story that would break the town's complacency. By the time the boy and his mother edged through the front doors with the golden retriever at their side, a crush of microphones and blinking lights spilled into the lobby, reducing the sterile waiting area to a makeshift battlefield of sound bites and outrage. Reporters surged forward, collars damp with sweat, cameras trained on the trio as if they were fugitives on display. "Ms. Harrington, has the clinic offered compensation?" one shouted, her voice brittle with sensational promise. "Will you press charges?" another demanded, pen poised above a reporter's notepad. The boy's cheeks burned as he felt the weight of every gaze. Students who'd sneered at him days before now stared in open sympathy. Parents shielded their children's eyes. And the clinic staff huddled behind closed doors, their whispered apologies drowned by the roar of the press. As flashes staccatoed against the walls, the mother raised a hand, her voice rising above the chaos with the calm authority of a judge's gavel. "We are here to seek accountability, not spectacle. My son deserves respect and the right to medical care without prejudice. His dog is not a prop. It is his lifeline." A hush fell before the cameras clicked anew. The mother's words carried the weight of every insult the doctor had thrown, every mocking whisper of entitled that had followed them out of the lobby. A reporter's voice trembled slightly as she asked, "Do you believe this was a racially motivated attack?" The boy's eyes flicked to his harnessed companion, to the dog's steady, unflinching gaze, and he nodded once, quietly. "Yes." He tasted the word, on his tongue. Yes, admitting out loud what he had felt in every bruise of his pride and every tremor in his heart. The flash of cameras was relentless. But behind them, across the street, protesters gathered. Students carrying signs that read, "Health, not hate." Parents holding placards with images of the boy's dog and the words, "Service animal," "Human right," and neighbors who'd watched the scene unfold live on social media, their murmurs swelling into chants that rippled through the morning air. Meanwhile, inside the clinic's administrative office, the director paced before his board of trustees, his silver hair mussed, his suit jacket unbuttoned in defeat. Their faces, usually shielded by badges of authority, now hovered between fury and fear as they watched the lobby camera's live feed splashed across the conference screen. "They've mobilized the community," one trustee hissed. "This could destroy us." The director's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "We need a statement, an apology," he intoned, but his voice lacked conviction. Outside, legal teams were already unspooling like battle lines. The Harringtons' attorneys prepared subpoenas, demanding the clinic's policies and disciplinary records, while the clinic's lawyers scrambled to craft a defense that wouldn't read like a confession of racism and cruelty. In the midst of it all, the boy's retriever, once scared and trembling, stood tall, its golden fur gleaming under the lights, tail wagging in defiance. Reporters leaned in, capturing every pant and padded footstep, every click of the wheelchair wheels that carried the boy forward into history. By noon, the clinic's lobby had been transformed into a war room of public opinion. Patients peeked from behind chairs, curious and cautious. Staff lined the walls, their faces pale as betrayal. And the mission statement above the reception desk, once a hollow promise, now bore the weight of irony so crushing that every letter seemed to drip with shame. As the mother guided her son toward the exit, a final question rang out. "Will you accept their apology if it's sincere?" The boy paused, leash slack in his hand, and looked back at the crowd of cameras and onlookers. "Words aren't enough," he said, voice steady as steel. "We deserve real change, a guarantee that this will never happen again to any child, any service animal, any family." The cameras whirred, the crowd held its breath, and in that charged moment, the boy realized that the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Injustice would no longer be hidden behind clinical walls or bow-tied policies. As they emerged into the afternoon light, protesters roaring approval, the retriever's triumphant bark echoed against the glass, and the clinic's reflection wavered, revealing a building undone by its own cruelty. The next chapter would unfold in courtrooms and council meetings, but today the boy and his dog had claimed the power to rewrite the rules, and the world had watched. The courthouse steps felt colder than the clinic's lobby ever had, as the boy and his mother emerged into a sea of reporters, protesters, and onlookers, whose faces glowed with the fire of justice, the golden retriever at his side, standing as living, proof that love and duty outlast cruelty. Cameras flashed like staccato thunderbolts. Microphones jutted forward. But the real drama lay in the weight of every whispered slur, finally rendered powerless by the roar of accountability. Inside the packed courtroom, the air trembled with tension as the clinic's legal team, once confident in the immunity of policy, faced the Harringtons' case. Charges of racial discrimination, medical negligence, and emotional distress. Witnesses testified to the doctor's contemptuous refusal to treat a black child, the sickening thud of a service dog thrown like garbage, the cold nightmare of feeling less than human beneath a veneer of medical authority. Each statement cracked the clinic's facade. Staff members who had sat quietly watched while a child wept in pain and fear now spoke of their shame. Community leaders described the ripple effect of that single act of hatred. Even the reporters who had once sought sensational images now testified that no photograph could capture the depth of humiliation he had endured. The doctor took the stand, eyes darting, voice tight, as he struggled to explain how labyrinthine policy had overlapped with misplaced judgment. But each word he chose only bared the prejudice underneath. The judge's gaze was unyielding, and the hush that followed the boy's quiet but piercing testimony, recounting every humiliating moment, felt like a drumroll to justice. Outside, supporters held banners aloft reading "Respect Lives" and "No More Silence," their chants echoing off the stone pillars, while a solitary protester waved a sign bearing the boy's dog's smiling caricature, "Hero with 4 paws." When the verdict was read, finding the clinic liable on all counts, ordering mandatory anti-bias training, significant damages awarded for the boy's trauma, and a formal public apology delivered at City Hall, the courtroom erupted in a wave of relief and vindication that washed away the last echoes of racist whispers. The boy's mother gathered him in a fierce embrace, tears streaking her cheeks as she whispered, "You changed the world today." And the retriever pressed its head into his lap, its steady heartbeat a gentle hymn of survival. Reporters clamored for their reactions, but the boy simply raised his chin, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "No child should ever feel less than human. May this be the end of cruelty hiding in policy." As they exited into the bright afternoon, the clinic's glass exterior stood like a broken mirror, its reflection fractured by the truth it had tried to conceal. And behind them, City Hall's steps awaited the public apology that would be broadcast live, a promise that even the most polished institutions can be forced to atone when their humanity fails. In that charged moment between the dying echo of the gavel and the first notes of a new beginning, the boy realized that victory does not erase the scars of humiliation, but it does forge a path forward, one where justice, once a distant hope, becomes the dawn rising over a world no longer willing to turn away from its own ugliness. Let us know in the comments what you think of this story. Have you ever experienced racism in your own life? Your voice matters deeply to us, and we value each of you more than words can express. If you're here until the very end, type "I stand with justice" so we know you listened all the way through. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. Have a good day.